When you hear the name Kevin Durant, you instantly think of one of the greatest scorers the game of basketball has ever seen, an incredible generational talent that only comes around every so often in the NBA. But for some, when thinking of Kevin Durant, they instantly think traitor, sellout, ring chaser, cupcake, you name it. For some, Kevin Durant's legacy will be defined as the man who bounced from the team that drafted him in his prime to join a 73-win Warriors team that he himself could not beat and blew a 3-1 lead to in the conference finals. Now, whether that's fair to put that label on Kevin Durant or not is up to you, but it always is something that creeps into the back of one's mind when thinking of KD's career when you're comparing him to other all-time greats. And as Durant's career winds down and heads into the final stretch before retirement, winning another championship and not just being known as the guy who joined the Warriors to win titles is paramount for Kevin Durant and his legacy. And when Durant was surprisingly traded to the Phoenix Suns prior to the trade deadline in 2023, joining up with one of the best teams in the league at that time, who had just gone to the finals 2 seasons before that, everyone thought the Suns were the team to beat. That championship was all but locked up for them. It was championship or bust, until we all quickly realized that the Suns' experiment of putting together a super team headlined by Devin Booker and Kevin Durant wasn't a good fit and would go down as a horribly failed experiment. While the Suns will continue to double down and try to justify why they mortgaged their entire future on this roster, it's pretty clear that the Suns eventually will have to accept defeat and move on from this experiment. But what if I told you that Kevin Durant has already made his decision about his future, a future that will have him on the move this summer out of Phoenix in an attempt to win another championship before he hangs it up? Let's talk about it. As always, if you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe to help the channel grow. We are nearing 100,000 subscribers, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, most people were shocked, including myself, when it was first reported the Suns were shopping around Kevin Durant just days before this past trade deadline. This, of course, was after it was clear Bradley Beal wasn't going to waive his no-trade clause, and it was even more shocking that the talks between the Warriors and Suns were gaining momentum on a return to the Bay for Kevin Durant, until Durant said no thanks and that he has no desire to go back to the Warriors. And while there were discussions and trade scenarios involving Durant going to other teams, ultimately nothing materialized before the deadline and Kevin Durant remained with Phoenix Suns. But the message was clear: Kevin Durant is available. And it's also pretty clear that from Durant's perspective, and being surprised that the Suns included him in trade talks at the deadline, that he's ready for a new home. And who wouldn't be when you're on a team that doesn't have much going for them in terms of their future, the most expensive payroll in the league, and is sitting below 500 and 11th in the Western Conference on the outside looking in of the play-in post-All-Star break. And even though Kevin Durant claims the reason he rejected a trade going back to the Warriors, simply put, was because he didn't want to move and wanted to see the rest of the season play out, and so to some that means, well, he clearly wants to stay in Phoenix and make this thing work. No, Kevin Durant didn't want to go back and join the team for which he got so much criticism for earlier in his career and be known as the guy who had to ride the coattails of Steph Curry once again to win a championship. The Suns front office, by including KD's name in trade talks and Durant being blindsided by this, including his name in those discussions, isn't going to sit well with him, and any loyalty and dedication he had to the Suns organization has completely evaporated. So no, I don't believe for a second that he wants to stay in Phoenix, and that's why he rejected that trade going to the Warriors, not after the team tried to move him at the deadline, and especially not after the team isn't anywhere close to winning a championship. KD is now on his 3rd coach since joining the Suns. They failed to make it out of the second round of the playoffs in his first season with the team, getting completely embarrassed in that final game of the series. They failed to make it past the first round in the following season, last season, and now there is a very strong possibility they won't even make the playoffs this year. And to me, it was plainly evident that Kevin Durant has no intention on staying in Phoenix when he was asked this question in a pregame press conference.
So politically, I know this is a political question, but you know, if you had your choice in the matter and it's not into your control, would you rather just play the rest of your career in Phoenix?
Man, I'm gonna focus on Houston tomorrow, man. We ain't gonna go there right now.
Now, he mentioned being focused on Houston. That was because it was the team that he was going to be facing off against that night. But when I was thinking about possible trade destinations for Kevin Durant this offseason, should he actually ask out, or should the Suns just continue to try and move him since they know this roster has hit its ceiling? But I would not be surprised if Kevin Durant ends up in Houston. A young up-and-coming team that has exceeded expectations this season, have made a massive jump from last year. They've got a budding all-star in Alperen Şengün, great complementary young pieces they can build with for the future, but also veteran players that fit the mold and are great mentors to the younger guys. Kevin Durant on that Rockets team would become instant title contenders. Now the question is, well, how would a trade work? And to be honest, it really depends on how the Suns approach this whole thing. Because by trading Kevin Durant, you'd have to assume it means they're going to tear this whole thing down and start fresh, sell off their older veterans, acquire as much young players and draft capital they can to start on a path of rebuilding. And in that instance, the Rockets could make a trade given they have a plethora of young players and draft picks. Now, maybe you wouldn't want to mortgage your future for an aging Kevin Durant, but the Rockets could keep most of their core if they included Fred VanVleet and another player for salary filler with some first-round picks for Kevin Durant. And while they're going to lose a lot with Fred VanVleet running point, they're going to gain tremendously with acquiring Kevin Durant. That said though, given what we know about the Suns' new owner, Matt Ishbia, and his aggressive push to win now and bring the franchise their first championship, and even continuing to double down on this group when it's clear to nearly everyone around the league that this isn't going to work, I really don't know that we can definitively say that the Suns, by moving Kevin Durant, would do so and actually go on a fire sale and go down a new direction. I could easily see a scenario where they trade Kevin Durant to try and get a win-now player or players in return and still try and push for a title with Devin Booker as their number one option. And if the Suns do in fact go down that route when looking for a trade partner, the Rockets likely don't make sense because they're not going to trade Şengün, and while they've got promising young players, it's not going to be to the level the Suns would want to be able to stay competitive. I've heard some people say the Spurs are a potential destination for Kevin Durant as he would greatly move the needle for what they're building with Wemby and now acquiring De'Aaron Fox, although hopefully Wemby recovers okay from what we learned of his blood clot injury in his shoulder and being out for the remainder of this season. But if the Suns are still pushing for win-now star-type players in exchange for Kevin Durant, the Spurs don't really have much to offer. A lot of young players, a lot of draft picks, just like in Houston, that would work perfectly if the Suns would go down a path of rebuilding, but the only star-level players they currently have that can provide an immediate impact to the Suns are Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox, which the Spurs are obviously not going to trade for Kevin Durant. And so to me, the team that makes the most sense, in my opinion, I believe Kevin Durant will ultimately push for is getting moved to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, it was reported while Kevin Durant's name was in talks with the Warriors, the Timberwolves were actually another team the Suns had discussions with in a last-ditch effort before the deadline, but ultimately making a trade work for Kevin Durant was far too complicated given the Wolves are a second apron team and they're not able to aggregate players in a trade deal, which they would need to do to match Kevin Durant's salary. However, come the offseason, the Timberwolves, with a handful of contracts on their books expiring, will bring them below the second apron, which will enable them to aggregate players in a trade and make a play for the services of Kevin Durant. And in line with the Suns continuing to try and win now, even though I think this would be a disastrous move on the part of the Suns, but I could see a trade scenario where they seek a return of Julius Randle and Jaden McDaniels in a first-round pick. I could see Ishbia thinking Julius Randle, while not Kevin Durant, is a player they can use to put alongside Booker and Beal, since they can't trade Beal, a strong scorer, younger than Kevin Durant, so he fits the timeline with Booker a little better. McDaniels they bring in as a defensive anchor because they need defense, and he's a younger player that they can work with for quite some time as a building block. Ishbia could delude himself into thinking they could still go for it and pushing for a title by making a trade like this, even though I think it wouldn't move the needle for them whatsoever. And then for Kevin Durant, I feel like he's already made his decision and not wanting to stay around in Phoenix long term, and he's looking at one of the up-and-coming superstars in the NBA. He went head-to-head with him in the playoffs last year and got eaten up by the young stud in Anthony Edwards, a player that is hungry, confident, competitive, and continues to get better every passing season. Kevin Durant is probably looking at that and saying, yeah, I need to be with a player like this to finish out my career. Going to a team where I'm not necessarily the best player anymore, but can give them a massive leap offensively as the number 2 option towards the end of my career. And not having the pressure of being the main guy, the go-to guy on a nightly basis. So we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. We'll see if the Suns can somehow suddenly turn things around and make a playoff push. But if they don't, I would say it's almost guaranteed Kevin Durant is wearing another uniform come the start of the 25-26 season. Just my take on the matter though. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.